worked for Rural Energy Coordinator as a Rural Energy Coordinator for Tanana Chiefs Conference. Dave has been working on rural energy needs in the bush community since 2009. He holds a bachelor's degree from Cornell and an MBA from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Runs 2 small businesses, serves on the board of Fuller Valley. We have 2 children and call Fairbanks their home. We also have with us Jamie Hansen. Jamie is information projects on survey research, economic analysis, and more recently administering campaigns. Prior to joining Information Insights in 2013, Jamie worked for University of Alaska Center for Economic Development, providing business plans and feasibility studies to business and nonprofits. Jamie has the Master's of Science and Resource by University of Alaska. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to kick it off.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. So let's go to, so Dave and I have been working with many others to create a Solarize campaign. And so first I just wanted to say what the Solarize campaign is. Number one, it's a volunteer campaign, which means 2 things. One is that the people who are organizing it are either volunteer or basically their time donated by the person.
Hello, dear.
Second, that at the end of the day, it is entirely volunteer in terms of who participates and how outreach happens. The purpose of the campaign is to bring solar to the and energy efficiency to residents of buildings in Fairbanks, North Starborough. And the goal is to make it easier and more affordable to go solar in this area. Okay, so some of the goals of the campaign. Oh, I think I missed a slide. That's okay. So it's to reduce energy costs for ratepayers. It's to make it easier and less expensive to go solar. It's to increase the installed capacity of photovoltaic solar in Fairbanks, North Starborough, and to ideally tag on energy efficiency to those installs. And it's to grow the clean energy economy. And I think it's important right now just to say in terms of who all is working on this, you know, because these goals were decided by basically a coalition of people, volunteers, and organizations. And so I'm with Information Insights, Dave's with Tanana Chiefs Conference. We also have support from the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, and Mike has been very involved. We have support from the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. Ben Loeffler is serving as an advisor for us. We also have support from the Northern Center, and as well as the Alaska Center, which has actually been operating a similar but not exactly the same campaign in the Anchorage area. And I'm really excited. I think we're going to get additional support from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, especially as we involve businesses in this campaign. So that's who we are now, and we are always looking for more partners. So real quick, how does the Solarize campaign work? I've separated it into these kind of 3 categories, with the idea being like the first phase is learning and signing up. So that's where it's about identifying building owners that are interested, either residential or commercial, determining the boundaries of the campaign, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but you know, are we doing it geographically? Are we doing it by membership or congregation? So who's solarizing, basically? Informational meetings, and you'll actually see this repeated a lot. I mean, this is a huge education effort to educate building owners and installers and lenders and appraisers about what does it mean to make it easy to do solar business in Fairbanks. And then, of course, and you'll see this continue, gather more interested building owners. So that's the first step. The second step is the select and decide. And so there's a request for proposals that's put out. Our organization helps draft that request for proposals. Then the the individuals who have signed up and expressed interest are the ones giving feedback and actually deciding what are the criteria, what is being requested of the installer, and how will that installer be selected. So once that goes out, the installer is selected, and then each building owner receives a customized proposal from that installer. And I think that's a really important point. So up until now, this has been a different process. But once we have a selected installer, everything proceeds as if you, as an individual building owner, are going directly to the installer, contracting with that company, and getting the system that is right for your building. And then, again, more informational meetings and gathering more interested building owners. And then finally, the last phase is where the building owner makes a decision on whether or not they actually want to contract with the installer to get solar PV panels on their building. The panels are installed, and so this I did because the whole idea is that it's a tiered pricing, so the more people that sign up, the cheaper it gets. So at every point in time, there is a lot of interest from those participating and effort on the organization to get more people to sign up, because the final discount that each person receives, each building owner receives, will be confirmed at the end. So the idea is that from your initial quote to the final, to the end of the campaign, you will see continual reductions in the cost of the solar PV system. And so that's where the Solarize campaign really stands out. And
who selects the installer?
Great question. So each, again, it depends on how the area is organized, but let's say it's a neighborhood. So there would be a committee that are volunteers who are hopefully roughly representative of the individuals that have expressed interest in getting solar panels in their neighborhood. And that committee has a specific branch that is in charge of selection. So they sit with usually it will be an expert like Dave Messier or Ben Loeffler to design the RFP. Then they sit with the bids that come in, again, with support from the solar experts to really determine, what does all of this mean, and then they make the selection. So it's a group that is representative of the individuals who have expressed interest. It is not Solarize Fairbanks, it's not other individuals, it's really a community decision.
Here's the second follow-up question would be, it seems a little backwards from the normal bid or procurement process where you would put out, you would open it up to potential installers, they would provide bids, and those bids would be part of the selection process.
It is.
A cost basis would
Yes.
be part of the selection process.
That is how it works.
Oh, okay.
Yep, definitely. So when the bids come in, those also have costs, like their identified discounts. And it's typically a range of discounts, like a menu, in terms of if X amount of capacity is installed, I can offer this. If X amount, I can offer this. And so, confirming the final discount, that's not a mystery. Everyone knows, if say, Goldstream Valley hits a certain amount of capacity installed, they will receive a specific discount. So, does that make sense?
Ish.
Okay.
Oh, again, it's just that I've gone through a number of procurement processes over the course of years.
Yeah.
And again, normally those two would be reversed. Under the middle section, it'd be receive your proposals, then make a selection based on those proposals.
And that is what happens. So once the bids come in, a selection is made, an installer is selected, and it's based on the criteria that the community has set. And, those can involve, is it a Fairbanks installer? What's the price discount? And, any other additional offerings. And so that's decided the installer is selected, and I think what's different here is the contracting. So the RFP is released by, say, the community organization or even Solarize Fairbanks, but they are not, as a group, contracting with the installer. Each individual building owner is contracting with the installer. So that's kind of the difference that I see, that I was a little bit confused about in the first place. And so once an installer is selected, individual building owners decide whether or not they want to contract with those basically menu of discounts, recognizing that to achieve those discounts, everyone has to pull together to sign more people up. And that sort of last point about confirming the final discount, that's defined in terms of what those discounts could be. But as I understand how it works in Anchorage, that came towards the end because they were constantly trying to recruit more people.
It's like, sorry for question.
Yeah.
It seems like it's kind of a community effort is that the goal on it. So in essence, you have to identify the community of which you're going to install this.
Yep.
To get concurrence on that community of how many people, if you've got 100 people or
Right.
what, it seems like it's a very difficult thing to do.
That's a great question. So I think part of it is that the idea is that you're working in specific areas where there's some connection, right? People know each other or know of people. The second is that that's why there's so many informational workshops. So, we did a area, like a Fairbanks-wide community workshop in November. The next round of community workshops are going to be by area. So, for example, right now we have an organizer who's working on Goldstream Valley. There will be a specific workshop in Goldstream Valley on what will this look like in Goldstream Valley. And I will say, and Dave, you can weigh in here, as I understand it, in terms of like the specs for the type of solar PV systems, those have been pretty standardized, actually, certainly in Anchorage, and we expect that would roughly be the case in Fairbanks. But, again, I think this is somewhat easier because when an individual decides on whether or not to get solar PV, that's based on the customized proposal. Like, it is not, 100 people going in to get the exact same size and type of solar PV system. Absolutely not. They're simply agreeing on an installer. So that's what makes it easier. But there are definitely cases I know in Anchorage where, individual building owners, homeowners decided they didn't want to go with that installer and go with someone else, which means that potentially, right, they're losing out on a potential discount. So.
And I would just add two things. One, it's kind of, I compare it to the Costco model, right? If you've got 10 people going to one installer at a renewable energy system and say, hey, we want to combine 30 kW worth of solar PV, you're going to get a better price than if you and I both go in and say, hey, we want 3 kW each. So that's one thing, the Costco model, if you will. And then the second thing is that analysis paralysis that a lot of homeowners, I think, go through when they're trying to evaluate, does this make sense for me? It kind of creates the structure to help you evaluate that and provides, it kind of teams you with somebody that's got a good clue as to how these things work, and so that helps walk people through it. So those are the two things. And as Jamie noted, some people it's not right for you. If you're an independent person, you don't want to wait for the herd, which can be very frustrating, then go out and do it on your own. That's fine. And we had some people, once they realized what it was, that they walked out of the cold climate meeting. That's totally fine. That's to each their own, and everybody has that ability to go down and talk to, an installer on their own if they want. This is just kind of another tool in your toolbox to help you get from point A to point B if that's where you want to be.
And I will say, one thing that's been really exciting about Anchorage is, so and I'm a little ahead of my slides, but they've just finished the second year, and, they have had a number of installs, but many other installs outside of their particular campaign, and they've been seeing prices in Anchorage drop for everybody. So it's just, like Dave said, it's one particular tool. It doesn't work for everybody, but the idea is that ideally it helps everybody. And so now we're getting to some of this. So it's like, so why do a Solarize campaign? The first is the competitive pricing. So the idea of reducing soft costs. And this, and actually Dave and I spoke with the solar installer back in, August, and this came up as well. But this is bulk purchasing, but the reductions aren't coming because there is so much kind of product coming into Fairbanks. It's really a reduction in soft costs, which, can be anything from, customer acquisition to, the time it takes to do permitting, and, everything in between. And so, and there's an estimate actually from, I believe it's SolSmart, which is a U.S. Department of Energy initiative, that says about 60% of the cost of a solar install is soft costs. It's not the equipment cost. so, so there's room there. The point is not to, reduce profits for individual installers. Rather, it's to make it so it's to basically take some of the load off. And that's what this group does. By having individuals organizing and expressing their interest in reaching out to an installer as a group, that saves the installer quite a bit of time, and that's where the discounts come in. Also is the negotiated pricing, and it's also called tiered pricing. The whole idea that you have basically a menu of potential price discounts given different capacities, installation capacities, and that's area-wide. So the more prices go down as more people sign up. The next is what Dave was getting to, is that it eliminates complexity and provides access to support. And so one is that, I don't know about everyone else, but I will say that when I got solar PV panels on my house, I did not put out an RFP. I did not spend a whole bunch of time figuring it out because I had a ton of stuff to do, but I knew I wanted to get solar panels. This allows everyone in a pretty simple way to be involved in a competitive selection of an installer. That's fantastic. The next is that we have experts on solar PV options and financing options, and that gets into what happens once an area, I'm hoping it's going to be Goldstream, has identified that they do want to solarize, that there's a lot of effort put into educating and providing access to information for those who are interested. And then the third one, and this is actually new, is that there's, providing tools to get the most out of your solar PV system. And this is because, again, we're not one individual household. Instead, we're a group of people with connections across the state who have time to, example, call the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and find out what's happening with appraisers and how do we ensure that when a building owner, residential or commercial, invests in either energy efficiency or solar panels, how do they ensure that increases the value of their home? And then the last thing is that building owners are making their decisions. So like I said, everything up to now has been different from the standard process when one goes about getting solar panels. But at the end of the day, the building owner is making the decision just as they would if they were going individually to an installer. So the control is still there. They receive, customized solar quote, and they are not just allowed, encouraged. Everyone needs to make their own decision about whether or not this is right for their building.
It's the last word of their quote.
Yes, it is. And so just real quick, so has this been done before? Yeah, like a lot. I mean, thousands. I was looking for a number. There's not, because there's just been thousands of Solarize campaigns nationwide. I believe the first one was in Portland not that long ago. And so they've been organized by nonprofits, by municipalities, by businesses, by congregations. I was looking up in, I think in Washington State, the United Church of Christ has solarized 90 congregations. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And it's according to geographic boundaries, membership, employees. So it's pretty open in terms of how one kind of draws those boundaries around this solarized area. And it has, I've mentioned, it has happened in Alaska. The Alaska Center and Alaska Center for Energy and Power are organizing the Solarize Anchorage campaign. And it's been quite successful. They started in 2018 with 33 homes, went to 163 homes in 2019, and they're expecting many more communities and many more homes in 2020. So it's a process that builds on itself because, again, it has that education element, and it also has that element of, at least what's been happening in Anchorage, of bringing prices down area-wide, community-wide.
Seems like a strange mission for Alaska Center for Energy and Power.
Oh, well, so they, it's interesting. I don't think so because they are, this came to them from actually a person in Anchorage who was on a community council. That's how they've been organizing in Anchorage. They have community councils. And saying that, it wasn't ASAP saying that they wanted to organize. It was a guy saying, hey, I want to organize my community. And ASAP made that connection of, hey, sounds like you're talking about a Solarize campaign. We can provide the technical support you need. And that's specifically dealing with analyzing the bids that come in from the installers and also with tracking how the installations are going. So I see what you mean. They're not an organizing entity, but they are definitely providing technical assistance.
I guess what would you define as a community, just kind of thinking, just
Yeah.
scrolling around, happening to notice Bettles in the, newspaper the other day. They're a community of 7 people.
Yep.
I mean, that would, if you could get 7 people of Bettles to commit, that's 100% participation.
Yeah.
Would that qualify as a community?
It would. It just, it really just becomes a question for the installer if there's interest from an installer to go into a community that only has 7 potential installs. And also a question of what the discount could be. So size does matter, which is why in Anchorage, they typically ask a community. And again, they just do it by geographic locations because it's easy for them to organize according to the community council. They ask for 50 signatures. Not commitments, but just 50 signatures of interest. We're not going to use that same standard here. I mean, it'd be great, but, we have smaller areas. And so, but there's no real kind of bottom on what works. It just becomes a question of if you put out an RFP asking for and showing only, say, 10 people are interested, you just might not get any bids from installers. So it's a market process that will kind of, just eliminate that. So, but in terms of community, I think that, like I said, we do have someone who's looking to solarize the Goldstream Valley, and he's taking a pretty expansive view, I think, maybe, of what the Goldstream Valley is. We also have someone who's expressed interest in working with businesses along College Road. And I think as we continue, and hopefully we get more people who are interested, it'll be, I think, something that our group looks at combining areas so that we can have, enough people, or enough interested people in a given area, whether it's geographical or congregation or membership. But that's going to be part of our goal, is to ensure that we have enough people who can come together, agree on an RFP so that it, really does attract competitive bids.
The community can be any group, really. You mentioned church congregation, which might be a group of people that, work well with each other, but they lose some of the efficiency if one of the people lives in Salcha, 2 lives in Goldstream, and 1 lives in Two Rivers. For the installer then to move to an area and do 10 houses all at once, you lose that. So that there's give and take, but really it's any group that comes together is a community.
As opposed to, say, 50 houses in Beer Mark.
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And so I will say that at least what we've heard from Anchorage and a little bit from Fairbanks installers, that kind of the geographic proximity isn't the biggest concern. It's really about customer acquisition. So, having 50 people who have said, yeah, I want a solar PV system is a pretty good way to attract an installer. Now, you're right. I mean, if you're looking at someone who's, in Esther versus in Salcha, that might need to be removed. But generally, and at least, again, given the size of Fairbanks, we're in a good position to organize outside of just, real basic geographic boundaries.
Apologize, I walked in a few minutes late. I might have missed this, plus I'm slow anyway. So first question is, could you discuss a little bit just the economics of solar?
I'm gonna go into that.
Oh, you are, okay.
One more slide,
Then I'll wait for that, because I was just earlier this morning actually having a discussion with a friend about solar they're putting on their cabin, and it's just amazing. The costs are really affordable for regular folks. But then the other thing is this defined community. Are there other areas where you have kind of collaboration? Does it, besides just kind of this getting the bids together, getting your potential business, like you go into a village, you're going to have some shared ownership that's going to include a bunch of buildings. Do you ever do neighborhoods that are sharing any assets?
Well,
that's just a
great
thought.
question. It's actually come up before, and I will say for both Dave and I, this is our first go with Solarize. But at least for this go, we have not really even looked at doing shared assets. That there's not entirely different, but a different kind of community solar model that would fit that more closely. But But I will say that, you know, in designing the RFP and in doing the selection for the installer, there are other ways to collaborate, which we've discussed, and it'll really depend on the people who are interested in doing this, in terms of basically requesting that, you know, there be serious discounts for a certain number of homes in an area because they're interested, but they simply don't have the, you know, discretionary cash to go ahead and invest in solar. So that's the kind of thing that's happened before, and may or may not happen this round. All right, so last thing for me is that the changes that we're bringing to Fairbanks, and Dave has mentioned this too, is that we're adding energy efficiency, and I'll go into that a little bit more. But again, just the whole idea that it's always energy efficiency first, period, and then looking at a solar PV system. We're focusing on residential and commercial buildings, so businesses, nonprofits, public, doors wide open. We're looking at expanding financing options, and we're also, as you can tell, being very flexible on boundaries. All right, Dave.
Cool. All right, so I'll just really quick make the kind of comparison on the financing side or the geographic location. It's one thing if you're in Anchorage and you've got, you know, a group of a neighborhood which is all close together and you can move a ladder from one house to the next. It's another thing if you're in Fairbanks, and as Jamie said, you know, the customer acquisition. I do installations, and if somebody comes to me with 30 projects, I'm going to say, hey, let me bundle those and get a better product. Same thing with why people do housing developments as opposed to individual custom homes, et cetera. So a little bit of background. So I'm going to walk through the solar PV system. This is really basic. Some of you guys, I'm sure, already know. So you've got a PV array. That produces DC electricity. We use AC in our homes, so you've got to invert that from DC to AC. It goes through an inverter, and then it goes through a disconnect, which is NEC required, and typically you wire that right into your main breaker, your main meter panel on the outside of your home, or you can wire it into your breaker panel inside your home. But you're essentially producing AC electricity, and so that's what your home's using. It's very clean power, no issues with grid fluctuations. The power electronics in an inverter are really top-notch, and oftentimes you'll get electricity that's cleaner than what the grid is providing, especially if you're on the end of a line. So then that goes seamlessly into your home's electrical system. So if you're watching TV and it's a sunny day, there's a good chance that electricity is being consumed, is coming from your solar PV array instead of Golden Valley in our case. So it's very seamless, and a lot of people think you need batteries, et cetera. Batteries are 100% not necessary, and we're not advocating for them. I just did a little model for somebody yesterday that was curious, not a model, but I did a comparison. I said, look, I just did my first battery system down in Northway this year. It was $700 per kilowatt hour. If I go and buy a Honda EU 2000 generator, Golden Valley's reliability is upwards of 98%. If I buy a Honda EU 2000 generator and run it 100 hours a year, that translates to like $150 a kilowatt hour with the cost of the generator and diesel, and that's 100 hours a year. So, you know, you just gotta look at a lot of people are really interested in batteries. There's a lot of technology changing. California's got some new mandates. The costs are coming down, but for the net metering system we have in Fairbanks, it's really not necessary, and it's an added complexity and added cost that I personally don't recommend. So what we're talking about for Solarize is a grid-tied system. As Jamie was saying, these are the PV costs and what's happened in the last, 8-10 years or so. I've been doing solar since 2010. I think I did my first install, and that's about where costs were. I think because I work for a nonprofit, my first system was closer to $5 a watt, but they've come down substantially, which is really, interesting and unique, and what I think a lot of people don't understand, and one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of solar PV for the villages that I work in is the almost complete lack of maintenance. I've got a system that I put in 2010 down in Nenana, and it is still producing electricity, and I've been down there once to change out an inverter, and that was within 3 months of the install date. So it's really like that infomercial for the chicken thing. You can set it and forget it. It's pretty amazing, and that's why the implementation has really taken off across the country in the lower 48. So let me see. Typically, folks go, when you're talking about costs, similar to the way that contractors model building costs, right? If you're looking in a building, if you're going on the MLS to find a property, it's cost per square foot. What's the selling cost per square foot? For solar, it's typically cost per watt is how it's broken down. And so a good price might be $3.25 per watt, and that's simply a 4 kW system. That's 4,000 watts divided by the cost, which might be $13,000. So you get an installed cost of 4,000 divided by 13, or 13 divided by 4, that's 3.25 per kilowatt, or sorry, per watt installed. So that's how solar PV is priced. Obviously, larger systems, you can get a lower cost per watt. I just did a 120 kW system up in Hughes. We were able to hit $2.10 a watt. I helped Galena with a 24 kW system. We hit about $1.87 a watt. That's because we're really cheap and cost is a driver, but those are attainable if you look at the costs for the products, the cost for shipping, and if you run a really tight ship. It's very similar to if you've ever gone through a building project with a bad contractor, you know that the cost per watt can go up. If you go through a building project with a good contractor, he can streamline it, make sure all his guys are moving quickly and efficiently, and you bring the cost per square foot down. So just a comparison. This is a very simple map that gets thrown around a lot. This is the solar PV potential in Germany. You can see the purple and blue is on the lower end of the PV spectrum. The red is on the higher end. So roughly, if you're a dark red, it's about 2.5 times the available solar PV as the dark purple. This is a map of Germany, which has the most solar PV installed per capita in the world. I believe that's still the case. China might be overtaking them, but they've got a lot of folks, so I think Germany still takes the cake. And this is a map of the United States. You can see Alaska, and the point here is that the interior specifically, it's not as good as the American Southwest, but it is a better solar resource than Germany, which many people don't realize. We've actually got a decent amount of solar gain here. And so
Question on that.
Yeah.
It's not a map, it's the, frog boiling, you know, the average temperature is great. Our average solar might be higher here, but you got cold winters. Is that's the effective goodness of Alaska compared to Germany?
No, that's the solar PV, the solar irradiance that hits the ground. So it does not take into account any snow shading or the cold temperatures. Typically, solar PV does better in the cold, so there's no degradation of the panels. They have a longer life typically in the cold than they do in the American Southwest because heat is what kills electronics, not cold. So it doesn't take into account snow loads, but at least from my experience, I have seen this to bear true. It's not perfect, it's a model, but it says that we have about the same amount of solar PV hits the ground here, or more solar PV hits the ground here than does in Germany. So, a couple things that, just to try to dispel any myths, many people ask about snow up here, and solar PV will not work if it is covered in snow. That is a fact. It's not magic. It needs to have the sun's rays hitting it in order to produce electricity. That's what gets the electrons flowing. So it has to be available to be hit by the sun. And then another big thing, and I live up on Belaine Hill now, and in the Bird neighborhood, if you will, kind of above the university, above Pearl Creek, that area. And walking around with my two kids, I see a number of solar PV systems that are directly north of, 50, 60-foot trees. And they will not work in the shade either. So kudos to folks that wanted to install them. If you're looking at it from an economic point of view, you're going to have lower solar PV and thus a solar PV gain and thus a longer payback if you install PV in the shade. So it might make sense to take down trees. I just did a bunch of clearing at my property to get ready for solar next year. Mike?
Yeah, they're coming out with bifacial panels. Now, if south face is covered, will the north face get albedo or reflection?
It will, yep.
And produce energy?
Yep, it will produce some, not as much. But yeah, if you've got a clear panel and there's light reflecting off the snow, then at least clear on the back, then you will get some solar gain there. I have no idea how much. That's a great question for the university.
I think they're looking at it.
They are. They've got a study right now. They looked at it, vertical panel east-west orientation. I don't personally like that orientation, but regardless, I am looking at, I'm involved with a large project out in Kotzebue, and we are looking at bifacials to see if they make sense because the cost is within, I just mapped it out last night. It's about 2% more total cost of the project, and they could see up to, if you listen to the spec sheet, up to 30% more annual production. So it's a no-brainer, right? I don't know that that's true. I would say conservatively, you'll probably get between 10 and 20% more electricity, but hey, if you're spending 2% more on one cost and you can get 10 to 20% more production through the life of the project, you're going to have a lower levelized cost of electricity over the life of that project, and it's going to pay back a lot quicker. So this is somebody, Rick, I think, asked about the value of solar in Fairbanks. So this is a map that Ben Loeffler put together, a graph. It shows the solar gain. You can see Fairbanks does not do so well compared to Phoenix, LA, Honolulu. So that's the solar gain, right? That's how much solar PV is hitting the earth at those locations. We are dead last compared to those American cities. But when, hold on, wait. Don't ruin it, hold on. All right, but when you look at the value of solar PV, that's the cost per kilowatt hour that we pay, we're second place, right? So that's something that people have to get their heads around. Yeah, we do not have as good a solar resource as Phoenix, but guess what, guys? We're all paying 22 cents a kilowatt hour, and I think $22 demand charge is what commercial ratepayers are currently paying. So solar PV has a higher value here, even though the quantity of solar PV is less. And so that is a really important slide, and it's something that I've been trying to get people's head wrapped around for a number of years, and Ben is an engineer, and he popped this slide out like it was butter, and that was just fantastic. I think it's great. So the annual savings per kW of solar PV is somewhere in this range, right? So this is kind of this is where you stack up. If you've got a solar PV system, this is kind of taking into account this is not the value, right? That last slide was just the value, how much each kilowatt is worth. This is taking into account the irradiance that hits the ground and the value, and we're pretty much in the middle. So it still would make more sense if you're in LA or New York City, but where do we see a lot of installs? We see a lot of them in Phoenix. Everyone's like, oh, well, we're not Phoenix. That's true, guys, but it's more valuable here in Fairbanks, especially with Golden Valley's net metering program that they have in place. And so I'll go through this slide as well. This is a very sample. Golden Valley has a tariff that is, Gene, you know those well. That's what requires a utility to do something. It's not a, hey, should we? It's a you must in accordance with this tariff. If you install your system per their wiring diagram, then they must connect you and they must do net metering. Now, the way the Golden Valley system works, the net metering system works, was changed in 2017 per their tariff. It used to be, I think there was an annual true-up, if you will. So if you produce solar PV in the summer, you basically had until the winter. You had a credit on your bill in your account, right? And then you could use that credit all the way up till December 31st. That's not the case anymore. Now it is a monthly true-up. So if I produce a bunch of solar PV on July 1st, I have until July 30th to use that solar PV, right? Otherwise, you do not get the full 22 cents a kilowatt hour. You get the QF1 rate, which is Golden Valley's avoided cost. That fluctuates. It was 13 cents. I think this round they just got a tariff approved of 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And so if you think about 9 cents, that's a heck of a lot less than 22 cents. That's a bummer. But guess what? It's still more than they're getting down in Seattle. It's still more than they're getting down in Phoenix for every kilowatt hour of electricity they produce, because they have Henry Hub prices of, what are they, $2.50 per therm or something like that. I mean, their cost for produced electricity is so much lower. So their avoided cost is that much lower. So a lot of people also talk about the tax credits. Those are phasing out. So and I'm particularly interested in this for a personal system, if you purchase more than 5% of the cost of the system in calendar year 2019, you purchase more than 5%, even if it's not installed, there's no steel in the ground, you still get that 30% tax credit, even if it's installed next year.
I don't know if that's true for a residential.
You have to put a box in the wall. You have to show that you started construction.
That's fine,
You don't have to finish it, but
Okay.
as long as you started construction.
That's okay. You guys can talk to tax people. I've talked to mine and read the IRS publications, but I am not a tax lawyer, not providing tax advice, so full disclosure. Now, next year, it goes down to 26%. There we go. There's 2019, 30%. 26% is 2020, 22% 2021. Now that's a tax credit. It's different than a tax deduction, so it's much more valuable. If I owe $10,000 in taxes, right, and I spend $10,000 on a system, and I get a 30% tax credit, then I'm only paying $7,000 in taxes. I get $3,000 bucks. So you basically, if your system costs you $10,000 and you have a tax appetite, you have an effective cost of $7,000. And you can take that through, if you're, on a fixed income or whatnot, you don't have that tax liability, it does carry over. My understanding is it carries over to multiple years. So The other nice thing, and so this is a quick way to calculate the payback, the other nice thing is you can essentially kind of fix your future electrical rates. So there is an installer in town, I don't know if he's on the phone, so no disrespect, but it kind of chaps my ass because he'll take customers in and say, hey, Golden Valley's got a 5% annual increase on their electric bill. Well, Golden Valley does not have a 5% annual increase on their electric bill. It is closer to 1% to 2% or lower depending on the year. And so that's another benefit that I don't want to, no disrespect to any installer in town, but let's just stick to the facts. If you look at historical averages, the actual increase in electric rates is below 2%, oftentimes below 1% per year, and it is annually is like that for most utilities. So you don't know what future electric rates will be. I can tell you I don't think they're going to be any lower. I don't think they're going to increase at 5%, but they'll be increasing probably at the rate they've been increasing for the last 20, 30 years, less than 2%.
And Dave, I'll just add that in Anchorage, there was some displeasure because I think they were putting a 7% increase. So,
but do you have a question?
Well, I do kind of a Golden Valley type question,
Yeah.
which you can punt till later if
Yeah.
you want. So, exciting idea, if this works as, as you suggest it might. So talk about Golden Valley and the implications for this. If you're doing a net metering, if you don't have a battery, then what you could have is power surges associated with sunlight.
Yep.
So talk about that in the context of wind power, challenges that's created for Golden Valley when you have more than a manageable amount of it. So I guess I'm just thinking about this in the larger context, and so put on your board hat for a second.
Sure, and I'll put on my board hat, and as our board chairman says, I'm in no way representing the views of Golden Valley Electric.
That's why I asked.
The views of Dave PM. But so, yeah, that can happen in California. They've got what's called the duck curve. A lot of people have installed solar, and they have this big increase at 5 o'clock, or not 5 o'clock, I'm sorry. During the middle of the day, there's a big increase in solar production, and that's not when people are using their most electricity. They're using the most electricity at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So some utilities down there, because they've got so much installed capacity of solar, they're requiring you to put in batteries so they have some sort of grid stability. There's a housing development of 2,000 plus homes down in Phoenix, and the utility is actually part of this housing development. They're requiring them to install batteries. They've got some deal with the utility. You install batteries on every home, and the utility has the ability to go in and use those individually installed batteries essentially as fluctuation control on the grid. So there's a lot of that can happen. We're not there yet. We don't have, a million solar PV systems installed. We've got less than 1.5% of our base load installed, so it's not an issue up here. Could it be? That'd be a neat, interesting problem to have, right? Too much electricity, but currently it's not. We're not there yet, so. Unfortunately, it's kind of like when you get there, I guess we'll deal with that, and we are, if that's on the horizon, we see a big uptick in solar PV installations and any fluctuations on the grid, then we'll have to deal with that and create policy that helps prevent that, but we're not there. So the value of solar in Fairbanks, so as I said, there's net metering. That's the full cost per kilowatt hour, the full 22 cents. Then there's a snap rate. That's like 1 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a special program that Golden Valley has. And you will get a check, I think, on Earth Day every year for the total produced annually. And then any electricity that you send back to the grid, you don't lose that. It's not as valuable if you do it, they true up on the month to month, but you get the QF1 rate. So those are kind of the three value streams, if you will. And then a lot of people are also looking at potential CO2 reductions, and that's a big motivator for many folks in this town is they want to have a lower carbon footprint. And so that is up to everybody to do their own math and calculus on. PV system sizing, so this is a chart of my home. I use about 300 kilowatt hours a month, have all LEDs, et cetera, and that's why, I always stress efficiency first. And so you want to, when you're going through with your installer, you're not necessarily trying to maximize the space on your roof and fill every square foot with solar PV. You want to look at your electric bill, and you want to try to get everything, or at least if you're doing it purely for economic reasons, try to get everything that's in that 22 cent a kilowatt hour range, right? So try to size your solar PV system so that you're not sending too much electricity back to the grid. So this is a customer that I'm working with in town. This is his electric loads right there, and this is a map. I'm sorry, that's the output. That red line is the output, and this is his electrical consumption at the building. So you'll see we're not trying to offset every kilowatt hour. Every month, we're not trying to offset every kilowatt hour that's used. We're trying to get him the most value for the biggest bang for the buck. Mike?
So what size is your system?
My system?
Yeah.
I don't have a PV system yet. It's probably going to be about 5 kW, my system, because I've got 2 small children. So even though my load is less than 300 kilowatt hours a month, I've been told that young ladies like to take long showers and they use a lot of electricity. I don't know if that's true. I'll find out in a couple years. So I'm expecting it may increase as variables outside of my control take hold. So this is a solar PV I did down in Nenana in 2009. It's working. It's been working for the last 9 years reliably. The big takeaway from this, as I said, efficiency first. We put this solar PV array in, was really excited to learn about the technology and do all of the wiring, et cetera. If I had known then what I know now, each one of these lights is about a 70-watt halogen light. Had I replaced that with a 20-watt LED light, the annual savings from that change-out would have been the annual production from one PV panel. So that's a big takeaway. If you're putting in solar PV and you've got a 30, 40-year-old refrigerator, maybe it's a beer fridge, I don't know, but think about changing your appliances and reducing your electrical load before you go solar PV. It is the cheapest kilowatt to save or generate. So there's 4 lights there. Had we just swapped those out, we could have gotten the same economic impact on the building with 4 less panels.
4 less panels.
4 less panels because there's 4 lights. So 1 light, 1 panel, essentially. And that's important because not everybody does solar, but everybody can change out a light.
So that's just about in half on that.
It would have cut the electrical consumption by more, 70 watts to 20 watts. So almost a quarter. This is a system we finished up in 2018. We had it wired this year. We're waiting for batteries, but this is a system that I managed up in Hughes, 120 kW solar PV system. We used 345 watt panels. Did it for $2.10 a watt up in Hughes, which I'm very proud of, hitting those low numbers. But this is just, you guys have probably heard that there's a 1 megawatt system that just got commissioned down in Willow. It's not because MEA loves granola, right? It's because this makes economic sense. I was fortunate to be able to go down to Solar Power International in 2018. It's a solar conference down in California. The last one I went to, I think, was 2009 or 10, and there was a lot of granola eating folks at that one in 2010. I went to the one in 2018, and it is pension funds. It is folks from Saudi Arabia. It is a lot of Chinese investors. Those are the people looking at large multi-megawatt systems because the numbers make a ton of sense. There's constantly in the news, they're hitting new lows with systems that are commissioned. So down in Phoenix, I think it was, they just hit 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the levelized cost of electricity over the next 20 years. That was a 20-year power purchase agreement. Golden Valley, we just did a 563 kW system, which is a drop in the bucket in terms of large solar PV, and got it installed for $2 a watt. There were some inverter issues, so the numbers that they're using show that there's 11.47 cents per kilowatt hour LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. Had the inverters been working appropriately and received a firmware update, which they just got a few weeks ago, my numbers show for my solar PV that we should be, with this simplified way of doing the math, 7.64 cents per kilowatt hour, which is important because our QF rate that just came out is 9 cents. That's our avoided fuel cost. And prior to that, it was 13 cents. So those are the costs that we're avoiding. So if we're avoiding it 9 to 13 cents, and you can get a levelized cost of electricity at 7.6 cents, and that's for a small system, then we can keep driving that lower. Remember the graph showing where we are in terms of value of solar PV in Fairbanks. So that's why those folks down in Willow got a 1 megawatt system signed with MEA. I'm not sure what the price for that was, but it's not because they're trying to clean up the air down there. It's because this stuff makes economic sense.
Yeah. So that avoided cost, those numbers are Golden Valley's, those are Golden Valley figures, and there's no hide the ball in there. You've got appropriate costs allocated in the right places.
Correct,
Is that
yep, yep, and some would argue too many costs went into that, and we could have done that much more efficiently. But that is all the cost. It was $1.3 million for that system, which is higher than the original estimate of 1.1. But those are the numbers that Nate Minima presented to the board in a public meeting a few weeks ago. And that 7.6 number, that's not what they produced, but that's what I estimate they should have produced, because I know what solar PV can produce if it's working effectively. And I've talked to the folks at ASEP about what those inverters were doing and seen the graphs, and it's really frustrating that it was unaddressed for so long. But hopefully it is fixed now. So
All right.
turn it over to Jamie.
And so I think the next couple of slides are actually from Bruno, Cold Climate Housing Research Center is another partner on this project, and I'm going to skip over them because I think Dave hit more of the energy efficiency, but again, just making the point that before install or when considering sizing, one should always look at what energy efficiency upgrades could be made on the building. And so then we're going to do a quick run-through of financing. So in terms of reducing the solar PV costs, the first is, like Dave was saying, size the PV system according to need. And if you can't make the energy efficiency upgrades before, still size the system accordingly. The second is the Solarize discount. That's the discount that comes about through a campaign like this. The estimate in Anchorage was it was about a 10% average discount. We're certainly hoping to go higher, but we'll see. And then the tax credit. So looking at 2020, we're looking at combined a 36% discount in the cost of a solar PV system for someone who is participating in the Solarize campaign.
I guess I have one question. It hasn't mentioned it. You build a house, you plug into Golden Valley, you get electricity, kind of goes on forever, unless something weird happens. What's the life expectancy of these things? You're going to depreciate them on out. And if you're saving money, but then have to replace it in 5 years, there's no advantage.
And I think it's about 20 years.
Most of the panels that are coming out are 25 to 30 years now is the warranty if you get a good quality panel. So yeah, it depends. The inverters are warranted for 10 years, and that is literally, and I've had to do it, you call up the inverter company, say, hey, they'll troubleshoot it with you, and then they will send out a new inverter, which is pretty astounding. Who does that, right? 10 years. So I've seen them to be very reliable. That said, there's definitely, issues can come up. You should probably, cost out an inverter swap out at 10 years, but they could last 10 years. They could last 20 years. I've seen inverters that are going strong after 12, 15 years. So, but the equipment is very robust, very reliable, and very low maintenance. And the warranty is on the production. It's on the output. It's not on, hey, this won't break. It's this panel will produce at least 80% output for the next 20 years. Or 25 or 30.
Yeah, and so, part of doing this as a campaign effort, the Solarize group, we're working on two things. One is partnerships with local lenders, basically to build out a program for solar and energy efficiency loans that would apply to both residential and commercial. And we're in talks right now, and we're really hopeful that we'll be able to, at the very least, offer some preferential interest rates and loan types. The next is partnership with appraisers, and I mentioned this earlier, and it's basically working with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation on education and promoting the use of the Green Addendum, which is a tool to for homeowners and for appraisers, so that basically filling it out to value the investment value of energy efficiency upgrades and a solar system. And so the whole idea is to add that so it truly is an investment, right? I mean, it's not an investment if then you turn around to sell and you don't get any sort of value for that investment. That's the point of this. And it exists. It's in Alaska, and it can be done. One simply has to ask for it.
So where do you find the Green Addendum?
I got an email from Carolyn Ramsey, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, and we will definitely be bringing her up to talk with communities and individuals that are looking to be part of this campaign. And Alaska Housing also does a number of trainings and education courses for appraisers, specifically around valuing energy efficiency and solar on buildings.
They had a big and very good meeting on that. Was that earlier this year
It
or last
was.
year?
I think it was this year, and they're actually doing another one in March of 2020. It's going to be in Anchorage. And so we will definitely be highlighting all of that information as well. And then another thing, this is specific for businesses, is the USDA Rural Energy for America program. And these grants offer 25%, they're reimbursable grants, of an energy efficiency upgrade or renewable energy system. So, you know, it is a competitive grant, but it's competitive only within the state of Alaska. And basically, how it works is if a business is looking to get a solar install and they, you know, get the quote from the solar installer, and they go ahead and fill out the application, and if they're awarded, if they're awarded, they then have to pay for the system out of their own resources, and they submit for reimbursement, and they'll be reimbursed 25% of the cost of the solar PV install or of an energy efficiency upgrade. And it's pretty simple in terms of as far as federal grants go, which isn't saying a ton, but still, we actually work with commercial fishers doing this exact project in Bristol Bay, and it's possible, it's doable, and I think TVA did this as well.
TVA did do that for the 563. I think they got $225,000 from USD REAP. Just as an incidental, you know, I'm working with a customer now through one of my side businesses, and the grant has been approved. I think they had a meeting, but there's no budget. The federal government hasn't passed the budget.
They're not going to know anything until December 20, maybe. Yep. So that's the one thing it is.
There's hiccups.
Yeah, there are. And this is every for-profit small business is eligible except those in the municipality of Anchorage, because it has to be in rural Alaska. And so just real quick, as we're wrapping up, I want to talk about, you know, what does the Solarize campaign mean for businesses? As individuals who own homes, it's pretty similar. Oh man, it totally messed up my number. That's okay. So one is decide how to participate. So for businesses, it could potentially be, you know, solarizing your employees, so working with your employees, or joining other homeowners or businesses in your area to participate in the campaign. Another is to build support, and that's the whole volunteer element, is constantly talking with anyone who's interested about joining into this campaign. Registering with the Solarize Fairbanks group. We will soon have an online form for organizers to submit, you know, their information and kind of the list of interested either homeowners or business owners. The next is to basically attend an educational workshop. You know, and the whole idea of this is to give more information or similar information on solar technology, on financing options. We're hoping to have some bank representatives at these meetings, and more. So including having someone from Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and really talking about what it means to invest in solar and energy efficiency in your home or business. The next is to find an installer, and that's not done, an individual does not do that by themselves. That's working with the Solarize group and with whatever kind of community committee or business committee that is looking at this. And then you get a customized solar proposal for your building, and then you make a decision on whether or not you want to participate. And if you do, then you contract with the solar installer, and it gets installed. And then, so in terms of the timeline, what we're looking at for the 2020 campaign is, of course, we're in the outreach and kind of support phase, and this will likely change. I mean, this is kind of, you know, standing right here, right now, we're like, wow, this would be a great timeline. So in February, the idea is that the request for proposals would go out. In March 2020, that those installers would be selected. In April, that there would be community workshops in Solarize areas, so again, to increase that education and really help people make that decision on whether or not to contract. And in May 2020, the idea is that would be the end of customer sign-up. That will likely be extended, but there is certainly value in having a deadline, asking people to make a commitment by a certain point in time. And then in June 2020, that's when potentially confirmed discounts with the installer. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a floating process. It just really depends on whether or not more people are being added. And then the idea is that in June to September of 2020, the installations will happen, and then we'll do some customer satisfaction surveys. Because at the end of the day, this process will build on itself. You know, the idea is that we'll start in 2020, continue in 2021, and into the future. And, you know, for all of the organizations that are supporting this effort, we want to make sure that we have information from end users and from installers to make sure that it's a truly satisfactory experience for everyone involved.
Mike?
Yeah, you had a case up there for business, and you did not indicate that energy efficiency ought to be first. And that just leads to my question or comment, that the same pertains for all structures that are going to be solarized. Well, it should be for any that are electrified, right?
Definitely, that was my mistake. Yes, energy efficiency first for every building.
Okay, what I would like to see is that Golden Valley is going to participate with Solarize Plus, with business sense for businesses, where they come in and do the audit. And as a home sense and homeowner, they came in and they installed LEDs in my house.
Yep, we're working on that. We're definitely talking with Golden Valley.
I would love to see that relationship
Totally.
as part of your presentation.
Well, we don't have that relationship confirmed yet, so
We
we're
don't?
not gonna, no, we don't, so we're not gonna present on it. But we're working on it,
Yep.
yeah.
Is that right?
Don't look at me, Mike. But the question has been asked, there hasn't been a formal letter of commitment, there's been informal, yeah, we'll support it, yes, we'll do that, but as of today, December 3rd, 2019, there's been no letter of commitment saying, you know, Golden Valley will contribute this many home sense and business sense audits to the Solarize campaign, although that is being discussed.
Well, I don't think they'd have to be contributed. I think the homeowner could pay for it.
Yep, definitely.
But
Yeah, they could, but let's
we
be
need to
honest,
advertise
$20 a piece, like, it's not a...
$20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that's good feedback, and I definitely appreciate that, and it's something that we're working on, and I'm working with Lisa Baraf on that.
Yep.
And we're trying to get something in writing. And I will note to the question that came up earlier about whether or not, you know, Golden Valley's thoughts on this. I mean, I want to be really clear, this is a raw deal for any utility. They've got to pay 22 cents a kilowatt hour, their fuel costs are 12 to 13, so what's that other chunk of money? Well, that's paying off debt for the plants that they've got in service, that is responding when there's an issue with a line that's down, that's reliability, 98, 99% reliability, so they don't get to capture any of those costs. We're just kind of cherry picking, right? If you install solar PV, I usually have a slide up there that shows Jeff Bezos, because everybody loves Amazon for the low cost, and everybody hates it when they put retailers out of business and local costs go up because businesses dropped off. So it's very similar to what Amazon is doing. You know, solar PV is kind of cherry picking, and for Golden Valley specifically, it's kind of the load that we don't really want to be cherry picked, right? It's the load in the summer when we've got excess capacity on the plants and not any load in the winter, and it fluctuates up and down depending. That's the worst kind of, you know, of load. But that said, you know, there's still a fairly low penetration of solar PV, and so the utility is required statutorily and by policy to allow up to 1.5% currently for net metering, and we're only around 1%.
Thanks, that helps me at least place your comments in context.
Yeah.
This is what I was thinking. Back to the two questions. One is, who's we in your group, community, legal, whatever, and then I think I missed that in my lateness. And then the other was, you have a goal for 2020. How many, is there a number?
We don't yet,
Okay.
and actually, we're having a meeting on Thursday, and that's actually at the top of my agenda of what is our goal. So right now, these are the partners that we have. Again, it's a volunteer campaign, and so I'm with Information Insights, Dave's Tanana Chiefs. We have Alaska Center for Energy and Power, Native Movement, Cold Climate Housing Research Center, Northern Alaska Center, Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, and the Alaska Center, and hoping to add very soon the U.S. Department of Agriculture in terms of supporting businesses who are looking at adding renewable energy systems.
So it's a collaborative group, there's not a legal
There is not, it is not an entity, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let me get Clark.
Yeah, just one question, which was, how many installers are you aware of currently in town, you know, that have been acting here, that could respond, you know, because they know they could do 20 or 30, you know, being that size of a community. I don't know if the answer is there's 2 or if there's 20 solar installers that are already available to Fairbanks.
Yeah, the answer that I've got is currently there's 3. There's ABS Alaskan Renewable Energy Systems and Remote Power. I believe Greg Egan is still working, but I think he's kind of word of mouth. I don't count myself as a solar installer because I work full-time and have all kinds of other things, so I can cherry-pick large projects if they make sense for me and my family. But there's currently 3, and so I will note, you know, and Jamie and I spoke with Stephen Trimble, who's got Arctic Solar Ventures out of Anchorage, and this is another benefit to this process and this program is the really attractive thing that Steven's got, not just that he's good looking, but he's got access through this solar cooperative of, I think it's 3.7% financing for 10 years on a solar PV project through this, he's a B corporation and he's part of Mosaic Solar, which is a solar co-op. So 3.7%, I mean, that's not quite, used car or new car rates, but that's pretty awesome. I think when, and I won't speak for Jamie, but when she did a solar PV system on her home, she had to do a HELOC and the rate.
No, I didn't do a
Oh, you
HELOC.
didn't do a
I did a
HELOC.
secured consumer loan.
Oh, a secured consumer.
I'd only been in my house for a year. HELOC doesn't work.
Bummer.
But
So,
yeah.
But three means competition, and you may drop. So.
well, it's more than that. It's trying to, yeah, adding competition, but also adding other tools. Lower financing is a huge tool. Can you imagine how many cars they sell if they were saying, 9%?
Yeah,
Financing rate?
and I will say, in terms of what they've seen in Anchorage, they've seen of course they have more solar installers, but they've seen those companies increase the amount of people who are employed. I mean, so I think doing it like this, in terms of having this like real intense campaign effort, does a lot in terms of growing the market for solar installers.
Gene?
I was wondering, Jamie, why you said RUS partnering would be just for business, when RUS has sources of funding that are low cost for energy efficiency, and solarization is one. And then the other question is, under energy efficiency, if that's the first thing, solar is only part of it. You've got additional insulation and potentially conversion to natural gas that can all be done with one loan using the appropriate repayment or financing mechanism, so that people can do all those things. More installation, solar, and conversion of the fuel for heat source.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. So for the USDA, you're right. So, but the one area that I've been working with, and that sounds like we've gotten commitment from, is actually to support the outreach effort, as well as having the grants, and that's only focused on for-profit businesses in rural areas. But you're right, I mean, and actually this came up, USDA has a number of grants, especially for senior citizens and those who are low income. So that's definitely something that we're going to add to our list of basically financing options. And for the second, it's funny, I didn't go into much detail on the loans because every time we've spoken with the bank and mentioned commercial side, they say, oh, there's tons of options for businesses. So I don't even want to put it up there yet, because what I want to have is I want to have a banker come and talk about what the options are, because you're exactly right. They were just, very comfortable with the idea of treating all of these, batching them together, treating it like it is an investment in a building that's going to, increase the value.
And I'll note really quickly, that's why that company, Arctic Solar Ventures out of Anchorage, has been able to offer such low financing, because they bundle across the country, they've securitized these products, and they're selling them in the bond market. So that's how you get to 3.7% interest rates or whatnot.
But I will say, I was pretty impressed in talking with some of the local lenders. They balked a little bit at that, but not too much. So there's definitely some kind of nice local options as well.
Okay. And on-bill financing as a possibility.
Nope, because we knew we were going to go over time. But yeah, so some things on the horizon is the CPACE, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, which would apply to commercial buildings, and then also the on-bill financing, which would apply to both. So, and those are on the horizon. Certainly not in 2020. I certainly hope they'll be here in 2021. But those are other ways to finance.
So you're saying both the state and the borough are being friendly to this whole process?
Yeah, and I'll note really quick, one of the things I think Gene was referring to is this RESP program that USDA has, and that's an energy savings program through USDA, whereby they would loan a bankable utility like Golden Valley money up to millions and millions of dollars at 0% interest, and then the utility can re-loan, and they could earn a profit or they could cover their costs. So that's a program that's out there that if you think Golden Valley should try to offer for Fairbanks residents, and I would encourage you to come to meetings or write your CEO, the CEO of Golden Valley, and just or talk to your board member and advocate for it.
Yep, and we are well aware of it. It's just we're not counting on that for 2020.
The resulting interest rate on that could be substantially less than 3.7.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
The one you mentioned was a grant.
Yep.
which is
USDA,
0%.
so USDA has a ton of programs. I mean, and to be honest, especially their loan programs are pretty seriously underutilized. I think part of that is just kind of the headache of applying and then reporting. But the grant program is rather simple, and definitely worth investigating for any business, for-profit business in Fairbanks that's looking at doing energy efficiency or renewable energy upgrades, additions onto their building.
Okay, well, lots of questions, lots of interest. Thank you, Dave, thank you, Jamie. It was,
Thanks for having us.
a good presentation, and we appreciate you guys coming here and appreciate all your effort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
And we'll have you back for an update.
Yeah.
Cool.
And John, we have a little, actually, Mike had it, we have a little handout thing. Could I send that to you to kind of like attach or anything?